Brilliant. Thank you. We have got the wonderful Simon Powers, who I think has been, I think I met him when he was working in Bristol, and he was working with Bristol City Council, and that would have been about 8 years ago. And that was probably the start of my Agile adventure, and he has gone on to set up Adventures with Agile. And he's now going to do some, he's now going to take us through some really kind of exciting stuff around systems thinking. So over to you, Simon.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gemma. And thank you all for being here on this, well, where I am, it's quite a sunny evening. So if it's sunny where you are, I appreciate being here instead of being out in the sunshine. So I'm sure we're from various different places. We create a system of our own, and we belong to lots of other systems around which influence us being here and the way that we interact. So today we're going to be looking at systems coaching and systems thinking and how they sort of combine. And I'm going to share a few slides. I'm not a big fan of slides, but so I'll try and keep them to a minimum. And I want to do a sort of presentation with some slides. If I can get the whiteboard thing working, I'm going to do a little bit of drawing. And then hopefully the vast majority of the time we spend together on this call will be sort of questions, answers, discussion, so that we can hopefully learn from all of us and ask any questions. So what I will do is, just for this first part, I'd ask you all to mute your mics, and then there'll be plenty of time for us to unmute so that we can have a good chat. So thank you for that. Okay, right. So so let me share my screen, and I'll just walk you through a few info points to start with. So let's have a look and see if this works. Good. So Zoom does its magic, and hopefully you can now see my screen. Now I'm just sorting out my Zoom controls so I can see you all still. Cool. Now I can see you and my screen. Great. So so a little bit of history first of all. So some of you know me, and some of you have probably heard of AWA and what our mission is. So many years ago, as Gemma rightly says, it was around that time that I was creating Adventures with Agile, and really saw a need to look at whole organizations. So I wasn't so much focusing on Scrum teams or even delivery teams at that time. It was more about how do we make a difference across an entire organization? How do we really look at all the different parts of this and move things forwards? It wasn't so much for me about scaling Agile. It was more about how do we create better business? And so I set about making Adventures with Agile in terms of using the tools that were at a sort of team level at a sort of wider systems level. And Adventures with Agile was born. And so I've been through all sorts of journeys with different clients over the years, trying to figure out what language do we use? How do we work with people who are not familiar with complexity, if not familiar with Agile, don't want to do Scrum, don't want to do Kanban at a more senior level? What tools have we got to sort of really move leaders and organizations on so that we can create the right cultures and environments so that things like agility at a team level can actually thrive and have a chance of succeeding? And so I kind of thought that this strapline, making working life better, is really the mission. And in all walks of life, I've been trying to make this better, because I think that if you make working life better, you make personal lives better. And then between that, we sort of make our world better. And so we've got this kind of sort of systems kind of thinking around not just work, but the wider impact of work on our own lives, but also on our wider systems of our communities, our countries, and the global economy, and also, of course, the environment. So it's really like a big topic. So there is a course which I'm not going to talk too much about, but if you're interested in what I'm talking about here, if you want to go deeper, there is an actual IC Agile course which is certified, which I'll be running both in London and online over the summer. So if you're interested in going deeper on this and doing a 3-day course, then let me know, and we can work something out. Cool. So the agenda for today will be what problems do we face now? Why is this even relevant? What is systems thinking? What is systems coaching? How have they helped? To give some examples and case study around how I've used it. and then look at some next steps for your own further learning, and then we'll go into Q&A. And that's kind of the talk's sort of shape. So first of all, is what problems do we face? And some of you may be familiar with my work on enterprise change. And so I run an enterprise class around how do you focus on the whole enterprise, and it's been really based around a coaching pattern for the last sort of 6 or 7 years. And what came up through the work I've done through the enterprise change were these 3 key points or key areas of an organization which are our leverage points to really make a difference. The first one being leadership. So we know that the challenge that we face in moving towards agile ways of working to solve business problems is that sadly, many of the leaders in organizations are not educated in human change. They don't understand the impact that having wide change, how it affects people. They're not really sure about how to lead in complex environments, still having very much a mindset of predictability and control. And so there's a certain amount of upskilling, and not just with external things like how do you do things, but also the mindset of how to behave. So there's a whole load of things there that need to happen if an organization is going to shift its ways of working. Structure is probably the most common place that we focus on when we're looking at organizations moving. And we know that there are some good patterns, but unfortunately with structure, it's one of those things that if you turn up and implement a structure on top of people, and we've seen this with the agile frameworks now, we've got enough data to know that installing agile frameworks such as SAFe and LESS and other things like this don't work in the long term. And they may give you some sort of 5-10% improvements in the short term, but things very quickly return back to the status quo. So what do we do if we haven't got these templates? So systems thinking and systems coaching can help us with what structures we might create and what processes we need. And then, of course, culture. How do we do things around here? How do we interact? What's the ethos or the energy of the way that people show up, interact, have relationships with each other and the work? And we can look at systems thinking and culture around, systems thinking and coaching around this area as well. So they're the 3 key areas of which I have used systems thinking and systems coaching. And at the back end of this talk, I'll talk about 3 specific cases where it's worked, where other things didn't. So let's move on to what is systems thinking. And the first thing that we sort of come across in this topic is what is the system? We might be thinking about it, but what is a system? And systems thinking was or is a discipline that was designed for the complicated space. So if you're familiar with Cynefin, then you'll know that complicated is an area of predictable outcomes. So if we do something once and we can predict it, if we do it again, then most likely we get more or less the same result. And so there's a caveat with systems thinking, and that really is for the rest of this talk. And it's a really big warning that I want to give you, that the vast content that you'll find out there on the web to do with how to do systems thinking is for complicated problems. It's for analysis, to figure out things up front. You're mapping out the space, which is a complex very complicated space. And then you use that to then plan ahead. So why have I got this systems thinking tool up here? Well, I've adapted it over the years to use it as a coaching tool. And so if any of you have been on the enterprise course that I run, you'll know that most of that course is around mindset shift. It's about enterprise thinking, about how do we see the way that we interact with people, the relationships we have. And we know that the very core of that is that if we want to make a change, we need to include the people that are going to be affected by that change in the decision making. So we're not making decisions for other people, we're making decisions with other people. And so I want to caveat with that, because as we go through this and through the questions and answers, if there's a misunderstanding that I'm thinking that we're using this tool to plan everything up front, then that's not correct. It's a tool for collaboration. Okay, good. So that out of the way, what is systems thinking? So what is a system? So you are a system. your body is a working system. No one part of your body can do the things that you can do. So if we take a sort of macabre example, if you were to cut off your hand cannot write, but you can write. So your hand is not a useful thing without it being attached to the working rest of you. And so this principle is that the sum or the system is more than its parts. It's not made up of its parts, it's more than its parts. And of course, the thing which makes it more is the connection, the relationships between the parts and how they interact and create the whole. And you can see this with an incredible example, which I'm sort of copying from an amazing systems thinker called Dr. Ackoff. So if you've come across his work, he's a fantastic speaker. So if you search for Dr. Ackoff on the web, systems thinking, there's some brilliant lectures that he gave probably before I was even born. So this has been around for a while. And he gives this example of a car. So if we go out and we buy the best engine, perhaps we go to Rolls-Royce, we get a Rolls-Royce engine. We want the best gearbox. So perhaps we go to BMW and we get an amazing gearbox from BMW. And then maybe we want an incredible chassis. So we go to, say, Porsche and we get a chassis from Porsche, and so on and so on. And we end up with the best ingredients that we could possibly make for the best car. And of course, when we put them together, none of them fit and it doesn't work. So improving the parts of a system does not add up to improving the whole system. We need a different technique. So if you relate this to sort of agility, improving each individual team or each department does not make a better organization. And so really we want another tool, a different tool, to start thinking about systems. And what we find is that when we start thinking about systems is that where do we draw the line of the scope of what we're doing? Because I as a person am a system, but when I meet with you, we're a group or perhaps a team. And that system has different dynamics. And we're very different than the individuals. If we're on our own, we're very different than those individuals. We're actually something else. And that team can do things that no one of us can do. And so we see that actually we're part of a larger system, and that team is part of a larger system still in the organization that can do things that that team cannot do, or any one of the teams can do. And then we take that even further. The organization wouldn't actually be able to exist at all if you didn't take the market system. Or if you're talking about city councils, the system of our country or the city, the whole system that works, it requires that entire system for it even to be meaningful. And so if you extrapolate that out, of course, we go up to the ecosystem of the planet, which is, of course, a hot topic. How do we optimize our ecosystem for balance when each individual part is not really thinking as a whole? So systems thinking is going to become incredibly relevant, and already is incredibly relevant for things like climate change, things like terrorism. If you just focus on one small part of the system, it's almost impossible to understand. It's only when we take into the wider and larger systems, these behaviors start to make sense. And then, of course, you can go even further to the solar system, galaxy, and universe. And likewise, you can go smaller into the systems of the body, into cells, into atoms, down to quarks and all the rest of it. So we have to decide, where is it that the scope that is relevant for the problem we're solving? And so that's one of the first challenges with systems thinking. It's really about, what is the scope? What are we trying to optimize for? And then just being aware of the impact that optimization is going to have on the wider systems around us. So I thought a lot about what to put into this talk, and I'm quite a fan of sort of behavioral change or the mindset of what it takes to make systems thinking. And I hope I've relayed some of that, but I want to swap over and do something that I don't usually do in public talks, or even sometimes in the training so much, is to talk very practically about tools and how to do something. So I think I've caveated it enough that hopefully this tool won't end up being a weapon in your hands as a planning implement, and instead you'll use this as a coaching tool. And we'll come on to coaching in a second. So I'm going to introduce you to something called causal loops, which you may have seen before, but they are a really good notation as using to sort of map out different parts of the system. And what's so great about these is that you can, the reason why they're so powerful is because when we try to change a system, You may have heard the sort of systems term as the harder you push a system, the more it pushes back. And these tools give us a view of why that's happening. I'm trying so hard to make a change in this organization. No matter how hard I try, it still maintains the status quo. So why is that? What is actually happening there, which is pushing back to maintain status quo? And systems thinking can give us an idea of what that might be. So let's have a look at this one here, and then I'll do a bit of drawing of something that's a bit more relevant to organizational change. So on the left here, we have number of McDonald's restaurants. I assume that you can see this slide. So number of McDonald's restaurants. So this is a variable. In systems diagrams like this, in causal loop diagram, this has to be a variable. It can either go up or it can go down. If it doesn't go up or down, it's not a variable and it shouldn't be here. And it's very easy to accidentally write things that aren't variables, and the diagram becomes very meaningless very quickly. We're also looking for causal effects, not correlation. So if you've ever seen any of Dave Snowden's talks, you'll see he's very, very big on making sure that you've got causation rather than correlation, because correlation is something that just happens to be similar. And he uses, I think, the example of the number of Nobel Prizes versus the amount of dark chocolate eaten in the country. And so it just so happens there is a correlation between those two things. And if you were to start eating lots of dark chocolate, it's unfortunately unlikely that you're going to win the Nobel Prize. So this is correlation rather than causation. So we have to be aware of that. So number of McDonald's restaurants, it probably means that more French fries are going to be sold. I think that's probably a fairly straightforward assumption. The more French fries are sold, we're going to go around the loop this way, then more profits for McDonald's. The more profits for McDonald's, the more they can increase their restaurants, and so on. So this is called a reinforcing loop. It goes round and round and round, and we get more and more and more of it, and it can be runaway. Now, systems destabilize very quickly if we have runaway loops like this. Think about compound interest or a virus which overwhelms its host. You might be thinking about the population of the planet of human beings, things like this. When there's a runaway spiral, things go out of control. So why haven't we got McDonald's restaurants in every square inch of the landmass of this planet? Well, something must be stopping this loop. Something is regulating this. Otherwise, we'd have McDonald's restaurants on every shop on the high street. So this is what is called a balancing loop. A balancing loop is what stops the runaway change. So if you remember me saying, when as much as I push or try to change the organization, everything remains in its status quo, it means that there's a balancing loop somewhere which is negating your changes. So this is something to look out for. So let's have a look at this balancing loop. So we can follow it around the other way. The more French fries sold, the more French fries are eaten. Seems to be a reasonable assumption. The more French fries are eaten, the more fat consumption. The more fat consumption, the more health concerns. So far, we seem to be having another reinforcing loop. But then we have this O here, which stands for opposite. So the more health concerns, the less French fries are sold. So there may be other balancing loops as well, but this one balances the amount of French fries sold and could be a limiting factor which stops the reinforcing loop from spiraling away. And so you find balance. And this is a key thing of systems coaching and systems thinking. What we're looking for is to find balance in a system. So when I said we want to move the status quo, now I'm saying we want to find balance. Seems to be contradictory, but of course, what's happening is the external environment is changing. And so as the external environment changes around the organization, what we're looking to do is find a new balance with what's happening outside of the organization, or perhaps within different parts of the organization, so that we're constantly adapting to make the most of what's happening. So we've come out of status quo because the environment's changed, which causes all sorts of things like stress, bad quality, people leaving, projects which don't meet expectations and can't be met on time, all the things that Agile is there to solve because the world has changed. So now we need to find a new equilibrium with a different way of working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to attempt to partially draw some things using a whiteboard. Now, I had set up my iPad, but unfortunately my iPad pen has died. So I'm going to use this whiteboard. So this is a bit of a first. So bear with me if this whole thing doesn't work at all, right? So it's an experiment. So, okay, so hopefully you can now see whiteboard, and we're going to just do a little loop that I'll build up for you, which might be more relevant, just to give you sort of a bit of a help. So let's say we're looking at org design, and what we're hoping for is to get some good org design. Our org design needs changing, so we want more good org design. So what happens here? So we know that to make good org design, as we looked at earlier, we're going to need the leaders, leadership of this organization need to have some good knowledge about what good org design looks like. So let's put in here, so leadership knowledge and perhaps ability to implement. Ability spelt like that. So in our diagram, now I'm going to attempt to draw, hopefully this will work. So we know that the more leadership and knowledge there is, and the more ability they have to implement a good org design, probably is going to result in more good org design. So this is a good thing, right? So, so the more good org design we have, we know that culture follows structure. So it's one of the, if you remember Craig Larman's work, then we know that culture follows structure. I won't go into that too much, but it's a first order impact on the way that culture operates, how we interact, how we relate, makes sense, because culture is the sum of our interactions and relationships. So the way we're structured is going to have a big impact on that. So let's call that not culture, because culture doesn't go up and down. That wouldn't make any sense. So let's say this is a good culture. So the more good culture we have, so the more good org design we have, one would hope that we have a better culture, a good culture. So the next thing is if we've got a good culture, then hopefully we can be more fluid. We can work together, we trust each other, we've got the ability to adapt and flex what we're doing because we trust those around us. So let's put something in here, say called a fluid org structure. So we've got a kind of like, got a good org design, good culture, and then perhaps we can move things around, or perhaps this is a good process, good structure and process. So we've got good culture leads to a more fluid space that we work in. And if we're constantly having a fluid org space and we're reorganizing, then we're going to learn a lot because we're constantly adapting. And or maybe this should say, rather than fluid, an adaptable org structure or something like that, adaptable processes. And this then leads to more knowledge because we're constantly learning, adapting and experimenting with our org structure and our processes. So this gives us a reinforcing loop. The more good design we get, the more good culture we get, the better culture we've got, the more we can experiment, the more we experiment and learn, the better knowledge we've got, which means that we can make a better org design, and on and on and on it goes. So why is it that this doesn't happen? If we teach leadership how to do this, why doesn't this go round and round and round and make a better organization automatically? Well, let's have a look. One possible example might be, so if we have a very fluid org structure, perhaps there is disruption to the teams. Perhaps we've made it too fluid, perhaps people moving around. Now, I've worked with one organization where they disbanded their entire teams every 8 weeks and then recreated those teams with, depending on what work was coming up for the next 8 weeks and who was the most suitable people for that. And for a while that seemed to work well. But then after a while they really struggled. And when we come to the case study, I'll talk a bit more about that. The disruption to the teams. So the more fluid the structure, the more disruption to the teams means, is there going to be more valuable work delivered or less valuable work delivered? So if we disrupt the teams, probably not going to have as much valuable work. So here we put an opposite. So valuable work delivered goes down. Does this make a good culture? No, it doesn't. So if the valuable work goes up, makes a good culture. So these two are the same. So valuable work goes up, good culture goes up. So another notation is We can use two lines like this to show delay. So it might be the good org design takes a while before culture sets in, things like this. And so here we have a balancing loop, and we know it's a balancing loop because it has an odd number of opposites. So if you get these loops and they're really big, count up the number of O's, it's an opposite, it's a balancing loop. If it's an even amount or none, then it's a reinforcing loop. So this is the type of structures you build. You don't build this on your own, you build it together in a sort of coaching space, which we'll talk about in a second. And we can sort of map these balancing loops and reinforcing loops so that we can start to get a picture of what's actually happening in the organization. Great. So hopefully I can now close that. And I can see you all again. Fantastic. So right now I've got to, I want to share my slide again. Cool. Technology is wonderful. So that's basically systems thinking. It was used to analyze things up front in a complicated space. We're going to use it as a joint activity in the coaching space. So let's have a look at coaching. What is systems coaching? Now we have this absolutely fantastic diagram over here on the right-hand side that Gemma drew. This is something that we were exploring. So the systems coaching was something we're exploring in a group that we belong to, which Innovation and Leadership Mastery, which we run every 2 months. And welcome to come to that as well if you want. It's where we brainstorm different ideas, we work things out, we collaborate around things, and out of that, this fantastic model that, or this fantastic diagram. Thank you, Gemma, for allowing me to use that in this talk. Brilliant. So what is systems coaching? So systems coaching gives systems thinking its power in complex space. If you try and use it without systems coaching, as I think now I'm laboring the point, not going to work. So systems coaching is an extension of, or a subset of, professional coaching. And so it really leverages the power of you as a professional coach. And what we're looking for is very similar attributes of a professional coach and a facilitator, to then sort of mix those two things together and really be able to coach whole systems at once. And there's some pretty fundamental extra skills you need when we're looking at systems coaching. And so if you remember what I spoke about at the beginning about how a system is not just the parts, it's the relationship between the parts. And it's also the relationship between the system and its wider systems that it belongs to. So as a systems coach, what we're actually doing is not coaching the individuals. We're not coaching a whole load of individuals in a system. We're coaching the system as an entity within itself, which means all the relationships we're looking to balance. We don't take anyone's side. We haven't got an agenda of trying to force the system to do one thing or another. We're looking to bring that system into balance with itself and the systems that it belongs to. So an example of where this differs from professional coaching or agile coaching is that if somebody comes to me for individual coaching, what I'm doing is my primary focus is on how do I help this person in front of me improve. If that one person came to me and wanted systems coaching, I'd be looking at not only improving that person, but the relationship and the balances they have with all of the other parts of their lives. And so there's a fundamental difference there. And if you think about as a systems coach coming into an organization, we normally coach parts of the system at any one time because we don't have 1,000 people in a room or on a Zoom call. So we're looking at coaching the entire system through the lens of different views of the people we get in a room. And so what's the purpose of this? So if you have worked in various different organizations, or perhaps you've worked in one organization in multiple different places, then very quickly you realize that the problems that you're asked to solve are not the actual problems which need solving. So this is the elephants in the room which need to be uncovered to unlock what is actually really going on. So quite often we're asked to come in and do agile or solve some agile problem or help someone prioritize something. Well, normally the people we work with pretty much all the time, the people we work with are intelligent problem solvers. They can figure out these things themselves. It's easy to figure out how you prioritize a bunch of work. what's actually really happening underneath is that the system dynamics, the relationships, the models that people have in their heads are stopping the actual work from happening on a surface level. And a systems coach's job is to hold up a mirror, a very benevolent and kind mirror in some cases, so that the system is able to reflect and see for itself, or so the people that you're coaching are able to see the system for themselves and see these elephants in a room in a kind and professional way, such that they can solve the real underlying problems which are stopping them from solving the seemingly simple problems on top. And the iceberg model here is a great demonstration of that. The things at the top, the events, we can all see events. We know what meetings we come to. We know whether we're releasing code on time. We know whether the HR department is creating bonuses for people that are disrupting team dynamics. We know, we can see all that. But what are the patterns underneath that create those events? And often those are sometimes observable as well. But often those patterns are sort of partially hidden. And then there's the structures underneath those. These are the sort of the building blocks of the organization, the building blocks of what people are thinking, and how those structures then create the reoccurring patterns that are happening that then create the events that we're seeing. And underneath all of that is the mental models that we have about ourselves and work. So one of those mental models might be, we need to be busy. It's not good if you're employed by somebody and you're not doing something, you're not adding value. That's not a good thing. So this is a value, this is a belief. Now, of course, when we look at the systems level and we see that when people are 100% utilized, then we have massive backlogs, huge delays, and the entire system starts to crumble under the weight of its own work. So how do we create flow for our customers? We need to revisit the mental models that we hold that create the structures that we put in place, the patterns, and then the events. So systems coaching is a set of techniques which allow the system to see itself, to change its underlying mental models, such that we can really move forwards and create fantastic organizations. And so what we're looking at is to combine systems thinking, the tools in systems thinking, and use them in a coaching way so that we get people together and they can then start mapping out some of these patterns and loops and things which are happening in the organization, to really look at the assumptions that are going into those arrows so they can really see the structures in their own mental models. And so that's kind of systems thinking and systems coaching sort of combined. So I wanted to move on and share with you some ways or some things that have actually some real case studies about how this has worked. So I'm just going to grab my notes. Let's start with leadership. So leadership, structure, culture were the three areas. We had a big organization. It was about, I think this organization was about 2,000 people. So not a massive organization that some of us work for. It's about 2,000 people. And the leadership team in this case had asked us to come in, and they couldn't understand why their product owners were not being entrepreneurial. And also they just couldn't get it. And the product owners were saying that they they didn't understand their jobs, and there was all this conflict and confusion around what was happening. And so we got everybody in a room, and we did some systems coaching. We used some models to map out what was happening, and we realized that actually some of the problem belonged to the leadership team, where they weren't actually really a team, and they were really a bunch of individuals pulling in different directions. And as a result of that, the product owners were not able to really express their entrepreneurship side, because if they did one thing, some other director somewhere else would come in and shout at them or tell them, or at least they had done historically. And so there's this sort of elephant in the room of, there's no way I'm going to stick my entrepreneurial head up because someone else is going to come along and chop it off. And these are the kind of metaphors that they're using in the coaching. And of course, this was a big shock to the leadership team. And so we did some work purely with the leadership team and coached them into what is a team. Do they want to be a team? And what does that look like? And so we helped that leadership team develop. And one of the other challenges that came out was that the CEO of this team felt that her strong point, and she was a brilliant entrepreneur and had really taken the company forwards, and her strong point was sharing the vision. And when we worked with the teams in this coaching session, one of the biggest challenges they had is that they had no idea what the vision was. And so this juxtaposition, they never talk to each other because there's a mile between the CEO and the teams. And so doing this sort of systems coaching allowed her to sort of, face the harsh reality that she needs to improve her communication skills about the vision, which she did do. And to all her credit, she actually saw this as a huge, amazing piece of information for her to develop. Amazing CEO. And so the system uncovered all these things, which just wouldn't have probably been possible if we hadn't used coaching. You wouldn't have seen this on any org chart. You wouldn't have discovered these dynamics without really getting into the coaching side. So structure is the next thing I wanted to look at. And you may remember me starting the story of these teams who had been disbanding every 8 weeks. So this was a ex-McKinsey model where they had come in and told everyone to disband teams after 8 weeks. And because that enforced the fact that you had to get everything done. So it's a great way of enforcing the end of a sprint, because you disband the team. So if you haven't got it done, you're in big trouble. So, you can kind of see the logic in it. But of course, the impact of that, and to use the metaphors they used, which came out in the coaching, is that we are like parents. We have a family, and every 8 weeks, our family is disbanded, and the work, which is our children, goes to the orphanage to be finished. And there's this other team, which is this makeshift team, which wasn't there when McKinsey was there, that the company had created because all the work never got finished at the end of the sprint anyway, and of course had to go somewhere. So it went over to this team with a never-ending backlog to try and solve all these problems. And they called this team the orphanage. And of course, this was, partially heartbreaking that anyone would lose their child in this way. And so we started building new structures. They started building new structures based upon the concept of the family and the fact that they looked after their work and how do they care about this work. And through some of that, there was some, which I'll tell you about in the next part, was some fantastic stories around how they treat that code and the challenges when bugs come up and all those kind of things. So recreating the structure around a family entity really got the enthusiasm going, using the language that they used so that they could sort of build self-organizing teams that were long-lasting with care for the work and the quality that they wanted. So another win there with the coaching. And then the last part is around culture. And so this was working with a different organization around culture, which about 33%, roughly a third of their staff was leaving every year. And in some parts of the organization, huge attrition rates of staff leaving. And so believe it or not, they weren't actually bothering to conduct leaving interviews, which always strikes me as strange. And the reason they weren't conducting leaving interviews is because a lot of them are contractors and nobody bothers asking contractors why they leave. Don't ask me why, crazy, but there you go. So they didn't have any data of why people were leaving. And so they asked us to come in and help create a better culture. And as I know that you can't affect culture directly, so there's something else that needs to change. So we did some systems work of what was happening. And what we found is actually there are some very, very strong technical people who have been there for years, who have very strong ways of doing work and have created very much a hero culture. So baked in the technology is some very complex code. And when that complex code goes wrong, certain individuals come forwards because they know the technology really well. And then they stay there all weekend figuring this stuff out. They get hugely rewarded. And of course, that then encourages them to be the ones who are fixing things next time. And so that knowledge was never being shared out. It's classic hero culture. And what that meant is that there was not really any scope for change. Developers, technical staff were coming in and seeing sort of the mess. There wasn't any ability to change that mess or make it better. So what do we do about this? So in true systems coaching and thinking style, we don't come up and tell them what to do about it. We hold the mirror up and say, what is it that you want to do with this? And of course, we can give them ideas for experiments. And so what they did there was they saw this And they realized that, you know, even the heroes didn't want to do that. They always complained about working the weekends, even though there was this sort of inner sense of achievement for doing so. And so they started mentoring sessions and communities of practice around sharing the technical knowledge and expertise that they had, and slowly start to remove that hero culture and changing the reward system such that people are rewarded for creating sustainable solutions rather than this hero culture. So 3 different ways in which this has helped. So I'll kind of, there's a couple of things I just wanted to share with you in terms of next steps where you can learn more about this stuff. And the first one is something that Gemma and I belong to, which is this innovation and leadership group. And there's an incredibly small fee for like maintaining systems and stuff like that. But so we run this every 2 months. The agenda is completely fluid. The people who are on the thing make up the agenda. You come along and we brainstorm, we work out stuff, and a lot of that thing then goes off to create content for the community, content for moving the industry forwards. You can use that content in your own training and things like that. But really, it's a think tank for how do we make a difference in the world? How do we make working lives better? And some of the things that we've come up here have come out of that. And again, what a fantastic drawing. Just bring that out. So Gemma, thank you very much again. So, you know, it's brilliant. This was from one of the sessions that we ran around, I forget now what the title of that day was. Maybe it was about innovation. I'm not sure. I don't think you can remember, Gemma.
That one was people and problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, brilliant. So we did some things around that, and then the other thing, just to remind you about, there is this systems thinking course which you're welcome to come on. That's a IC Agile course. So if you want to learn more about this, join me on that course over the summer. So that would be fantastic if you do come along. And that would be the end of my slides. So let's close that out. So that hopefully gives you a sort of intro into the problems that we face, what systems thinking and systems coaching is, and some ways that we've applied that and had some success with it. So I really wanted to open up now for any questions, and you might be lucky and even get an answer, but certainly I'm sure someone on this call can answer whatever question you might have. So how do we normally do questions, Gemma? What's the format? Do we use chat? Do we just open it up?
Yeah, there's already, I think there's already a couple of questions, and people have been answering questions between themselves as well in the chat. That always happens. Right. But Mayuri, I think you had a question. Did you wanna ask that one to Simon?
Yeah, forgive that I'm not on camera right now, but so I think my thinking was about do you risk becoming part of the system as you coach within an organisation? Tony's answered helpfully actually that he's always accepted that he becomes part of the system as soon as he starts listening or opening his mouth, you know, that sense of contact within the system begins to influence it. The thinking I was going down was something to do with longevity of the relationship. So like, how does that influence the dynamics, maybe even power within it?
Well, what a fantastic question. There's quite a lot to that. There's at least 3 things I was thinking in there. As I wasn't not sure what the answer was, but it sounds exactly, I'm sure I probably always would agree with Tony anyway. We have similar sort of coaching backgrounds, I think. Being aware and being part of that system is quite different than perhaps the way that we do individual coaching, where we try to remain completely inert or what's the word? Not independent, the word's gone out of my head, neutral. So we remain neutral. Well, we know that that's not the case when we're a coach, because we are sort of suggesting things like experiments at certain points within the process. So accepting that we are part of that system is really key. And so what I'm just trying to think of the other things that you mentioned. So multi-stakeholder alliances are really key with this. So rather than thinking about just one alliance that you're creating, we create a working alliance with multiple people that perhaps aren't even in the room, of how we're going to, what's going to affect them, and how we're going to relate to other people that perhaps aren't even being coached, by the changes that happen within the coaching, how's that affecting others around us? So looking multi-system agreements there. What else was there that you mentioned? Do feel free to remind me of some of the things.
Thinking about power and dynamics.
Yeah,
brilliant. That was the only other bit. Yeah.
So power and dynamics is really key. And this is something that I'm very, very upfront about. So we as systems coaches hold power. And with power comes privilege. And also becomes the very risk that with privilege we marginalize. So we're always on the lookout for the blind spots, and having processes in place such that those that are marginalized are able to have a safe enough space to say, hang on a minute, this is much harder for me than it is for these people because I am certain XYZ attributes. So we see marginalization all around us. And we know that marginalization is happening and has not been looked at every time we see extreme behaviors. So if we look around the world around us now, we see extreme behaviors when voices are not being heard. And if voices are not heard for a long time, you see extreme behavior. And that extreme behavior in organizations might be a whole load of people leaving. So we're always looking out for, am I the creation of marginalization through the blind spot of my own privilege? So, you know, there's a lot of talk around at the moment about the privilege that certainly I would have as a white male of this age. It's easier for me to achieve things than certain other people who aren't in this particular privilege set. Does that make me bad? No, of course not. But does it make me blind? Yes, it does. And so we have to, as privileged positions, whoever we are and whatever state, as a systems coach, we have a privilege. And so we must always work hard with the help of those that we are I'm accidentally marginalizing, which happens. We need to work hard to keep our eyes on that marginalization all the time, such that we can open up the space and give the help that is required to people who perhaps don't have the privilege and things are easier. It's not a level playing field. So we're always asking ourselves, how do we create a level playing field? What do we need to do differently to make that a level playing field? And so that is part of the work, absolutely. And if we think about systems as being a balance, we're trying to balance a system, that would be a great place to start. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Cool.
We've now got we've got a raised hand, so a question from Umar.
Hi, Simon. Thanks for the chat. It's really helpful. Systems thinking is always very interesting. Being being a change agent, you're trying to make a change within a system anyway. So previously, people call these sort of roles as enterprise coaches, for example. So how would you differentiate an enterprise coach who is also looking at the system versus now relabeling yourself as a systems coach?
So I think systems coaching is a toolkit that an enterprise coach has or can have. So and it's one way of helping an enterprise meet its potential. So we don't have to always do systems coaching. There may be other things that we do as well. For example, training. We may train people in certain tools and techniques. We may do one-to-one coaching, which helps somebody uncover things that are going on with themselves. And so there's a whole bunch of different skills that one has. And if we think about what I call a coaching range, so each one of us has a coaching range. It might be small, it might be wide. And there are different coaching techniques and tools depending on the context of what we're trying to solve. And systems coaching is a tool which we can use to help, well, either one or normally used many people to really reflect and see those hidden mental models. So that's what that's for, but that isn't always what's required. There may be other things that are required. And so an enterprise coach is really, it's actually an incredibly difficult job with an incredible amount of different things that are required to actually be a successful enterprise coach. And I think that's, you know, systems coaching and thinking definitely could be a big part of that, but it definitely wouldn't be the whole thing. I don't know if that answers your question or whether you need any more detail or would like.
And I'll ask a leading question based on that, because you have kind of differentiated the roles, obviously, because enterprise guy is like has to wear different hats, etc., and has a massive toolkit. But then coming from like the perspective of a Scrum Master / an Agile coach who is just dealing with specific part of a system or specific part of an organization, to make those smaller changes, the system coaching could provide him that toolkit to work within those silos or those systems as such.
Absolutely, and I think it's a fantastic. I haven't got the link to hand, but there is. If you do a search for systems thinking and Scrum Master, there's a fantastic article somewhere that I read a while ago on seeing systems thinking through the lens of a Scrum Master and actually seeing the Scrum Master's role as a systems thinker. So it is very relevant for Scrum Masters. And what you might find, as you would in Scrum, whether you use systems thinking or not, is that the environment that you are in inside the organization is either enabling or disabling or a blocker in many cases. That could be a positive or a negative. And systems thinking might give you a way as a Scrum Master to articulate what's happening so that the blockers, which you naturally, I often think that Scrum doesn't create blockers, it makes things visible. It's like the lowering of the waters and you see the rocks underneath. And so systems thinking might enable us to understand those rocks just a little bit better. Why are they there? Rather than just seeing them as black and white, they are a blocker, they're not allowing me to do Scrum. It might be like, oh, look at the system dynamics of why that's happening. And if I try and change this blocker or I work with this blocker in a certain way, all that's going to happen is it's going to reinforce the blocker. So is there something else that I could do to enable this blocker, which is a blocker at a team level, but might be an enabler somewhere else? So you can't just remove that blocker because it's enabling someone else somewhere in the organization to do their job. So how does this work? How can I still get what I need without fighting the system? And so it could be used for that. And so I think it's very relevant at a Scrum level as well.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Cool.
Brilliant. So do we have any more questions or comments? I see, Femi, you've got a comment in the chat.
Yeah, cool. Just reading it. If you want to read it out, Femi, that's also.
Thanks, Simon. I think you've just in part addressed the thought I shared there with your explanation of how a team is a part of the entire organization. The organization in itself is a system. So whilst the Scrum Master or an Agile coach is focusing on the team, their focus is still on the entire organization because the team doesn't exist in its own right. It functions within a wider system. Whatever the team does, collaborate with the wider entity and what happens elsewhere. So thanks for your elaboration. It was just a thought that and I think I think I'm aligned with you. Please feel free to tell me if what I said is slightly off piste.
Yeah, no, I think it is true. I mean, we all operate on the systems that we have, and any impact or changes that we make changes the systems around us. It might be that the Scrum Master spends 80% of their time looking at the dynamics or helping the team succeed internally, but whatever they change there will have an impact on the system. I'm not saying 80% is the number to work towards or anything like that. It's just a made-up number at the top of my head. But they have a certain amount of time which they work on the internal team. And when that is, but they also work on the wider system because that's their primary purpose is to help that team deliver. And but of course they can't do that because of the dysfunctions in the organization most of the time. And so so they're working on both to help the organization realign itself. And I always think of Scrum Masters as sort of the first line of defense in a way of trying to re-optimize the entire organization for delivery, for customer value, flow to customer value. And that's where the value is actually happening right there. So it's a perfect place to sort of start in terms of sort of like figuring out like how do we get flow to the customer. So yeah, it's all good. Yeah, everything you said is cool.
Brilliant. We've got a question from Rupert by the looks of things.
Hi, Rupert.
Hi. So I get the whole Scrum Master kind of influence, but I was thinking more something you said earlier on, that systems coaching is about an awareness of the boundaries. And taking the Scrum example, they just get bigger and bigger and bigger if you chase every blocker in every system. So do you use any particular techniques to say, this is far enough, or actually I need to be encompassing this much to make a difference? I'm just interested in that.
Yeah, for sure. So I tend to work at a sort of a leadership level more than with individual delivery teams. So it's a bit, I guess in some ways it's a bit easier for me, because often the limits are the organization and any impacts that it has, either from an ethical standpoint or from sort of impacts that you're having in the marketplace with either partners or even competitors to some degree. So the system is fairly straightforward there, but even so, it'd be amazing how many leaders go down massive rabbit holes of what's going into the depth of certain things. And so for me, it's about before using these tools, it's really deciding what actually is the problem we're trying to solve. Because agility and all these tools is really only there to solve some kind of business problem or to do something. And so really, we only want to be looking at these tools for the smallest amount to solve that problem. And when we uncover certain things, then, there's what's called a sort of trailhead that you might sort of park for a while and say, well, look, that's something we can explore perhaps in another session, but we just want to keep going, to solve this particular business problem. And one of the challenges from a Scrum Master perspective is that I don't believe that bottom-up transformations work. I've never seen it work. I think they peter out, they disappear after a while, and it just doesn't work. So there has to start some point with the leadership, as well as working with Scrum teams and other parts of the organization. And so it's really about who is solving those particular trailheads, and is it can somebody else solve those bigger issues at a more enterprise level? And it's really about making sure that your voice at that level is heard at the enterprise level, so that people are actually working on that systemically. So I guess it's about figuring out what the problem is in front of you and using that as a scope, if that helps.
Thank you. No, that does. I've tried various change initiatives over my career, and I think most of the time they do fail because you can't get access to the highest level, because that's often the limiting factor. So it's interesting, but it's not a magic bullet, right? But it's good.
Yeah, exactly. Good. There's no absolutes, but we don't take on work now working with organizational change. We might do training in an organization, but we won't take on coaching work unless we can speak with leadership. Like, we don't even bother. Like, it's not that we don't bother, that's the wrong terminology. It sounds like we don't care. It's more that we don't know how to succeed doing that. So why would we take the job if we don't know how to succeed? So we've got to have someone on the board who sponsors what we're doing, and that's really important, because otherwise it just runs aground. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Tony, sorry, did you want to go, Gemma? You.
No, that's fine, Tony.
Thanks for sharing, Simon. I had a question. It's sort of related to Rupert's, and what you just said at the end there. It was, if you had a time machine, you could go back and you could do over again a time when you didn't have systemic coaching, which sort of situation or context would you go back to and go, you know what, I'd probably apply it in this situation now?
So do you mean if I look back at my history before I discovered systems coaching, I tried some things and now I've got it. If I went back, what would I do differently? Is that what?
Yeah, where would you sort of apply it where you didn't have it in the past? You couldn't have really resorted to using it because you didn't have it, but now you could.
So I can remember I don't know, there's probably loads of examples, but the one that just sprang to mind was when I first started doing enterprise coaching, as it were, rather than the architecture where I came from, was when I was employed specifically as a contractor. I worked for Barclaycard. It was many years ago, so long ago now that probably there's no one even working there that's working there now, so I don't mind mentioning it. And it was before the whole Barclays reorg, so this was like way back. And I was asked to go in and do an audit to see how their agile labs were going. This was up in Northamptonshire, and we went up, and they had all these rooms with clocks on the wall of how long people had left for their sprints and all these kind of things. A very agile sort of working space, and it was kind of this audit. And so I tried to, you know, I've always operated long in my career. I've operated on the principle of no surprise. So I don't like to surprise people. But so what I did was I sort of like did this audit, and I did it to the best of my abilities with my sort of, you know, agile hat on. And I spoke to the guy who was the manager who had sort of pulled me in, and I came up in the end. I had this document, and it had like 27 things that were wrong with their organization. And I kind of presented this to them as me, the expert, sort of going away, looking at their meetings, looking at their rooms, and analysing all of this stuff, and presented this back to them. And he felt obligated to then pass it on to the senior management. And so basically, there's the senior management, and they get this big document in from this expert of Agile, telling them all the 27 things that's wrong with their organisation. And of course, the reaction was like, "Thank you very much, Mr. Powers. We'll be in touch." And caused quite a stir there, and all that I did was ruffle a lot of feathers and upset people, and so looking back on that, I can sort of see that it would have been far better for me to have run a systems coaching exercise so that they themselves could have seen what was challenging for them, and that they could have then focused on the things that were most important for them to improve, rather than sort of cocky young agilist coming in and telling them all where they'd gone wrong. So not creating a them and us, they figure it out for themselves using the coaching techniques would have been way more powerful than, even if I was right, didn't make any difference. No one's going to action any of those things. That's going to be filed nice and politely in the bin so that no one ever sees it. You know, absolutely ineffective. So yeah, probably that's the one that comes to mind.
Thanks, Simon.
No worries. Good question. Cool. Any other questions or comments?
Just one from me, if that's okay, Simon.
Yeah,
So it's on metaphors. So you like mentioned, I think when you were kind of going through this case studies, there were a few like really strong metaphors out there, and I was wondering how important or tied in you see those types of metaphors with systems coaching.
Yeah, so I think it is really important. I mean, for hundreds of thousands of years, human beings have told stories, and we relate to stories much better than we relate to direct facts. And the stories are a sort of common language which we can create that binds us together, that makes us feel like we belong to something. And when we're working in an organization, what we're looking to do is to shift the ways of working, shift the way people see themselves and see the world around them. And often they use metaphors themselves already, but don't realize it. So examples are, you know, we're the Formula One of production. You know, we deliver stuff, we get it out quick. We are like a Formula One team. We just get stuff done. Another one was where when clients are in trouble, we work all night, we get the thing done. And the metaphor there is that we're like, you know, like an A&E department, because when problems happen, we'll do whatever it takes to fix those problems. And so these are strengths that these teams have. How they manifest, whether that's sustainable working or not, is beside the point at the moment. But these are strengths and things they see about each other. And what I look for is metaphors which are going to build strength, metaphors that are worth keeping, so that we can then build and extrapolate with that metaphor, so that people can start to bond into that and then create good ways of working. Other metaphors might be negative. So we had one team, which I started talking about this a bit earlier, but never finished. What I mentioned was that they had a team having quality issues. And their metaphor was that, oh, well, it's just a whole load of bugs. That's what you kind of expect around here. You know, we're like the disaster team, because stuff always goes wrong. But hey, you know, that's just what it is to work here. And they make a joke of it and then move on. And as a coach, I'm like, hang on a minute, what's going on with that? Hang on, what do you mean? Is that all right? Is that a metaphor you want to keep? Because the behaviors and the actions they're taking are based upon that belief system, and metaphors are a a way to get right in there to that belief system straight away. And so we go, well, what metaphor would you like to create? What metaphor would be a good one to have for the quality of our code? And then let's start growing that metaphor, and that changes behaviors, changes patterns, changes events. So yeah, really important and amazing tool for a coach to pick up on.
That was brilliant, actually, because that sort of leads me into the follow-up question, which is how important is it that you take a strand of that metaphor? So, for example, if they're currently A&E and that's not a sustainable way of working, do you like start investigating other hospital departments, or do you see what I mean?
In that case, we might say something like, oh, which one of you is, which one or more of you are the doctors doing the 18-hour shifts? What happens to patients after a doctor's doing an 18-hour shift? What would that look like to you? Is that metaphor relevant? So again, you can build upon this, but also using powerful questions and things to play that back. So it might be sort of things like, does that resonate with you? So this is where the systems coaching differs a little bit from one-to-one coaching, in that we might actually exert our will in the system and say something like, oh, I'm noticing that you are talking like this. If we extrapolate that metaphor, where does it lead you? Which is a kind of leading question, but the whole time what I'm looking for is to hold up a mirror. What's happening here for you? And so that they can then figure this stuff out for themselves. And quite often they'll be like, what are you talking about? That's not what, we don't have 18-hour doctors. Actually, what it's like is like this. And it's like, all right, the metaphor breaks down there. That's fine. It's all information. We've all just learned something about the system. That metaphor doesn't apply. That's cool. So you can't really go wrong with this stuff. That's the beauty of it. It's always just reflecting back whatever happens. So it's a nice place to be as a coach. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. Thank you. So I just want to check, does anybody have any other questions or comments or anything for Simon? No, lovely. Thank you so much, Simon. That's been an absolutely amazing talk, and it's been really lovely to see everybody again, and lovely to see some familiar faces as well. So yeah, thank you.
And thank you for hosting me, and thank you all for turning up as well, and hopefully see you on a systems coaching course maybe. Take care, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
See you, Simon.
Bye.
Bye.
Good to see you all.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thanks a lot, Simon. Thanks a lot, everyone, for coming.